Ohio State, the 4 seed, against number 1 Georgia, champions out of the Southeastern Conference. Georgia's 13-0. The Buckeyes are 11-1 after sitting out conference championship week. Same formula here. Give me, and Garrett, let's start with you. Give me what kind of catches your eye when you put these two teams together on paper. What are you expecting to be some of the overwhelming storylines that we watch on, I guess it's Saturday night at 7 p.m.?
I think that this is another case. We've had a lot of these in bowl season where, you have one team's strength against the other team's weakness. And I think this is another example of this. Just in terms of scoring, Ohio State has the second best scoring offense going up against Georgia, who has the second best scoring defense, right? So these are teams that, it's a real unstoppable force, immovable object situation where Ohio State scores a bunch of points. That's what they do. They go out there, they throw up a bunch of points. But man, against Georgia, the best defense you can compare them to is Michigan, right? A team that plays really solid defense, has some good athletes, really sound assignment. And I mean, that's still just a comparison. I think Georgia's got the better defense between them and Michigan. Man, Georgia just plays such a different level of physicality, such a different level of things like that. And we saw what happened when CJ Stroud got pressured. We saw what happened when he got off schedule. That was one of the things that we highlighted going into this game was, man, when CJ Stroud gets blitzed, when he gets off schedule, that he's not the same quarterback that he is when he's on schedule. Things are fine. The pocket stays clear. They're going to have to find a way to keep the pocket clear for him. On the flip side, Ohio State's defense hasn't been necessarily what they expected it to be, bringing in Jim Knowles and hoping that maybe that would give them a boost to be a top 5 defense. But at the same time, Georgia's offense has been inconsistent this year. They've put up some big points, and going into this game, you're glad if you're a Georgia fan to see them put up 50 or whatever it was against LSU in that SEC championship game. But at the same time, as a Georgia fan, that you haven't seen the best offensive output from your team consistently this year, and you're really hoping that this offense shows up and they show up to this game, get off the bus, and I think that if you're an Ohio State fan, you have to hope that your good but maybe not great defense can take advantage of some of those things that Georgia doesn't do so well, can take advantage of a Stetson Bennett who has been efficient but maybe not explosive this year, definitely not a scoring explosive quarterback. He's completed 67% of his passes for a good yardage number, but only 20 touchdowns in the air. That's not a massive number that jumps off the page to you. I think you're kind of hoping that you can take advantage of that if you're an Ohio State fan, especially considering what you saw when you matched up with Michigan and your team did not look anything close to like what it had looked like the previous 11 games.
I think we might be, I don't know, I'm going to throw this to you guys. Are we overlooking the Ohio State defense just a little bit? Because statistically, they really have been, a big turnaround this year. I'm looking at just the numbers. They're 15th in pass defense, 25th in rush defense. That's including we all saw what happened against Michigan. We know they gave up a lot of yards against Michigan, still 25th in the country, and 12th in total defense, 13th in scoring defense. So are they the 2021 Georgia Bulldogs? No, but I think I don't know. I think just nationally we're overlooking their defense just a little bit. And I think that could be a very interesting X factor because if they're able to put some pressure on Stetson Bennett, if they're able to find, anyone to cover Brock Bowers, I don't know who that's going to be for Ohio State, but if they're able to find a solution to the Brock Bowers problem, and if they're able to kind of contain the running game a little bit for Georgia, this could be a pretty close game that Ohio State's offense could take over. I'm not saying it's going to be a repeat of the first year where Ohio State just kind of blitzed Alabama and Ezekiel Elliott took over that game in a 4-versus-1 matchup, but I think that formula is there, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about that necessarily. I think a lot of people are assuming Georgia and their defense is going to shut down. And look, I've been the first to kind of point out that Ryan Day's teams have struggled in physical games. They've really struggled against physical defensive lines that push them around a little bit. When the game script gets off balance for Ohio State, things get spiral out of control very quickly, typically. So if Michigan can do that, Georgia absolutely can. But, you've given Ryan Day a full month of preparation to look at film of this Georgia defense. They've been hearing for a whole month how soft they are. These are good athletes, right? Like these are prideful dudes that are good athletes. Everyone's telling them they're not supposed to be there. They're soft. I think this is going to be a close game, and I think it's going to be really entertaining.
Hey, listen, they did plenty of push-ups in between trips to the kitchen during conference championship week. So, No, okay. So on their statistical defense side of things, I agree with you because when I looked at the numbers, I went, on paper, this is not matching what I watched that last week of the regular season against Michigan. And I do think that the stats you have to take with a bit of a grain of salt because you factor in teams like Iowa that have forgotten how to throw a forward pass. Northwestern, they played in 50-mile-per-hour
Not a
gales.
murderer's row of offenses,
No,
just like we talked about
Rutgers.
with Michigan.
Exactly. Yeah, teams that aren't really throwing it downfield more than once, at the 20-plus yard mark. So I do think that traditionally Big Ten teams have on paper maybe better pass defenses than they would realistically. You throw in the fact that then they do play a Michigan team who maybe they took for granted. I don't know. I mean, Michigan, it wasn't exactly slinging the rock down the field either. And then time after time after time, they got beat over the top. So, maybe that wasn't in the game plan and their secondary was just kind of conditioned to come up instead of go back on, at the line of scrimmage. I don't know. But that what you're saying about them hearing it, how bad they've been for a month, that is a motivating factor. And look, this is not a team that's, lucky to be in the college football playoff for the first time in their program history. This is a blue blood who won the first ever college football playoff, right? They are expecting to be here. Ryan Day, after they won the Rose Bowl last year, said, yeah, this year's kind of a disappointment because they didn't make it to the playoff, right? I mean, that's just the reality at Ohio State. So you've got these big time guys, one of the best defensive coordinators in the country in Jim Knowles. I do wonder if his type of defense still is a year or two away from being fully installed just because he is so aggressive, so complex. And hey, when he brings that blitz, you'd better have corner island on the outsides because you've got nobody to help you over the top. I think personally for me, this is the best matchup that Ohio State could have to advance, right? Because Georgia's not normally going to throw it deep down the field. Now, have they been very good slinging the rock to their tight ends, Brock Bowers, to Eric Gilbert, to Darnell Washington? Yes, absolutely. Lad McConkey slips behind the defense and he's gone for 60 plus. Absolutely. But this Georgia team wants to run with their combination of four backs. And for me, that's what Jim Knowles does. That's what he's so well conditioned to stop is bring blitzes off the corner to hit that running back in the backfield, to stuff the A gaps. For me, I think this is very, very close contested ball game all the way down to the end. And Garrett, I'd love to hear you on this too. Trey and I are clearly on the bandwagon that Ohio State has a great chance to win this game. Do you feel that way too?
Okay, so here's the thing. I don't want to sound like an Ohio State hater. I really don't. I just don't think that they are going to be able to match up with Georgia on this one. I hear what you guys are saying, and I respect their defense more than maybe what it sounded like off the front. They keep the yardage numbers low. Kind of to what you were saying, Mitch, part of that is the competition, but let's not pretend they didn't play two very good offenses in Michigan and Penn State, both of which had some success. Michigan obviously more than Penn State did. Right here, it's only 184 in passing and 119 in rushing a game for them. So good numbers. I look at Georgia's numbers, and I think that here is your main problem. Georgia averages giving up 77 yards rushing in a game. We saw what happened when Ohio State's run game went away against Michigan. The run game went away. You pin your ears back, you pressure Stroud, he gets off schedule. I don't think that they're going to have any success running the football in this game. I don't see a way for them to have any real success in this. I also think the really unfortunate thing is the fact that this is being played in Atlanta. Like the Peach Bowl is right in Georgia's backyard.
Yeah.
They dominate games in that stadium. I mean, there's some really good teams that they've played this year. I think back to the beginning of the season, that Oregon team is no joke, and they stomped them in that stadium. I don't really see much of a path here for Ohio State. Here's the Ohio State path. You have to hope that Stetson Bennett comes into this game choking, right? You have to hope that he comes in this game and he is not on it. You can get after him, you can pressure him, whatever it is, and the moment's going to be too big for him and he's not going to deliver. That would make sense if he hadn't just won the Natty last year. You have to hope that maybe some of their star playmakers aren't there for it. I don't see that happening. I think Lad McConkey is an underrated factor in this game for Georgia out wide. I think you could see him having a big day against some of that one-on-one like you were talking about when they try to bring in pressure. But I just think you have to respect guys like Kenny McIntosh, Dejon Edwards, Kendall Milton. These guys run the football well. They're maybe not as explosive as guys that Michigan put out there against Ohio State, but these guys run the football well, and I think they're going to wear them down over the course of the game. Again, I'm not trying to say Ohio State has no path here. They can score with the best of them. If they show up and their offense shows up and they're on, then Georgia has to tie their shoes extra tight, make sure they double knot them because it's a track meet, right? And I think that's the way that you have to go with that for them. I don't see that happening. We've seen prolific offenses go up against this Georgia defense. Tennessee disappeared. Yes, that was a home game. This game's in Atlanta. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I don't want to be that guy. I'm not saying Ohio State doesn't have a prayer. I'm not saying they're not the fourth best team in the country because I honestly believe that they belong in this game as opposed to an Alabama, Tennessee, whoever else. At the same time, I do think that there are this year 3 teams that stand out above that fourth team. And unfortunately, I just don't think that Ohio State has what it takes to win this one this year.
I think if I'm a Georgia fan, I am very concerned about our secondary, right? I think if you're looking for a weakness on Georgia's team, chink in the armor, it's certainly the secondary, and you don't want that to be your weakness against an Ohio State team that's going to throw the athletes out wide that they're going to throw at you. And I think that's why I think this is going to be a closer game. But look, this is also going to come down to how does Ohio State respond to adversity? Because they did not respond well to adversity in that Michigan game, and that's why that game spiraled from them. It was a close game at halftime. I think they were even leading at halftime, and they just let one bad thing lead to another, lead to another, lead to another, and just spiraled on them. And that's why that game, I don't think I'd love to look at the advanced analytics to see. And there's a guy, I think it's Stats of War on Twitter, that puts out how bad did you get beat, and I'd love to go back and look at how bad Michigan actually beat Ohio State, because I can't remember at the time what it was, but watching it live, it just really felt like that game just spiraled out of control and Ohio State wasn't ready for that moment. And I don't know, like you said earlier, Mitch, I don't know if it was they just expected to win and when it wasn't easy for them, they just kind of folded, or if Michigan just kind of got under their skin as a rival. I don't know. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how Ohio State responds to another physical opponent that's going to want to beat them up front and really get to CJ Stroud. Because if they can't handle it mentally, it could be another blowout.
Here's my big stat that really is the issue for me. I am concerned a little bit about the Georgia pass defense, but when you really look into it, the concerns really go away. For me, look, they give up 215 yards through the air a game. That's not like shocking. That's not necessarily as good as they were last year. I do think they played some better offenses this year. They give up less than 1 passing touchdown per game. That's a phenomenal number, and I think you just have to acknowledge that if you're CJ Stroud and you pass for 2 touchdowns in this game, I think that's success. The problem is, are you going to stop Georgia from scoring more than 2 or 3 touchdowns on the ground? Find Brock Bowers on a seam route, something like that. I don't know where they stop them on defense. They could. I mean, Jim Knowles is a fantastic coordinator, and they have some great athletes on that defense. I'm not trying to take anything away from what Ohio State is. I also think that the thing that we're not acknowledging is where Georgia is as a program right now. And the fact that, I mean, they could be going back to back and looking at next year's schedule. A three-peat is not out of the question for the Georgia Bulldogs right now, especially with where their talent is, some of the recruiting, the transfers. And I just think that Georgia's doing different things right now. And we're kind of in the middle of a dynasty run for the Bulldogs.
Well, this game is going to decide if we are, I think, because
sure.
I think if they can get by Ohio State, I like their chances. I like their chances a lot against Michigan or TCU. I think the winner of this game is going to have a really great shot to win the national title. If Ohio State's able to upset, obviously the possible rematch with Michigan would be fascinating.
That would be sick.
This game right here, Garrett, is going to decide if we are in the midst of a Georgia dynasty, because this is going to be the toughest. They faced Alabama in the championship game last year. That's obviously really tough, but I think this matchup is really, really interesting to me. And they're going to be able to prove, or are they going to be able to prove that they've taken that step to be the top team in the college football universe?
Yeah. Well, and one more quick point. I think if Ohio State does win this game, I think your MVP of the game has to be Tommy Eichenberg. I think that's what you're going to have to see out of him is, look, your tackles leader for Ohio State, he's going to have to be all over the field. He's going to have to track down guys in space, play physical. And if he has a fantastic game, I mean, look, he's got 12 tackles for loss on the year. This is the kid who knows how to get after it. But if he has a fantastic game, I wouldn't be shocked if they do end up winning this game. I just don't know that he can perform at that level all game long.
Georgia needs to get chunk plays. That's what Michigan broke the will of the Buckeyes with a month ago, was every single time Ohio State had a disappointing drive or didn't manage, kicked a field goal instead of getting a touchdown in the end zone, Michigan answered with a 60-yard plus play. I mean, that's truly what it felt like. Every single time Michigan needed to open up the mystery box and have something spectacular happen, they got it done, and they got it done on the ground for the most part, right? And so for me, as we start our predictions here, I do think that Ohio State, if they can take away the chunk play, if they can get pressure on Stetson Bennett, and then ultimately they've got to find a way to consistently score points. I think for Ohio State, they're going to need 40 plus. I really do. I actually think this game turns into a bit of a shootout where I think the other one could be more of a defensive stalemate. I'm going to say the Georgia Bulldogs get it done because the one thing that Michigan did that I do not believe Ohio State has an answer for is the running game. And Michigan did that with really one back, with Donovan Edwards. Georgia's going to throw four at you. They've got two backs that have 800 yards rushing each. They've got two more that combined for, I think, 450 something yards. And Kirby Smart's whole philosophy is he runs with a stable of running backs. So as your defensive front gets tired, guess what? They've got a fresh pair of legs that's about to run right through you. I think this offensive line for Georgia has been very, very good. And then the defense, look, that defensive front, I've said it for weeks. We've said it for weeks. If you can get a pass rush on CJ Stroud, he doesn't know what to do. And Georgia can get to the quarterback. They can not only come off the edge with safety blitzes, with pass rushers from outside linebackers, but Jalen Carter can also get to the quarterback from the interior. And so you've got potentially three different directions that pass rushers are coming at CJ Stroud. I ultimately think that's what the difference is. So give me Georgia. I'll take Georgia 42-31 over Ohio State. I think it's much closer than that for the majority of the game, but give me the Bulldogs an opportunity to go and truly cement themselves as one of the greatest organizations in college football history. And then, guys, I think we start, the national championship narrative, and then maybe even the next year talking about, okay, how big is this dynasty going to get?
I go back and forth on a final score. I think it's going to be close. I think Georgia wins, but does not cover the spread just because I think there's so many avenues to an Ohio State cover in this one. I think the path to a cover is there's more paths to a cover for Ohio State. So I'm going to go Georgia winning the game, something to the tune of 38-34.
Yeah, I think that's a good number for Georgia. Maybe not as much for Ohio State. With the knowledge that I picked Ohio State to win the whole thing in the preseason, I'm going to go ahead and call a route in this one. I don't think it's particularly close for the majority. I think Georgia jumps out, stays out, and I just think that the game script, I think, is the problem here. I think Georgia scores early. I think Georgia takes advantage of opportunities early. And when Georgia gets ahead, you pin your ears back, you go after the quarterback, you force him to beat you through the air. I don't think Stroud can do that when he's pressured. If he does that, he'll be showing me something completely different from what he has shown me all year long. When he gets pressured, when he has to come from behind, I just haven't seen it from him. I think Georgia gets out. I think they stay up. I'm going to call something more like a 38-20. I think that this is decently high scoring for Georgia, and I think that Ohio State, they're going to score. They're going to move the ball. I could see some turnovers, on the, plus side of the field. I could see, some missed opportunities, and that's just what Georgia does. They just go find the ball. They'll pick one off when you're, just getting some momentum and then score a couple plays later. It's just what Georgia does. I think that they're a special team, and I think we're watching a special team right now that I think I'm willing to acknowledge is, possibly the dethroner to Alabama's dynasty right now. And I think we could be talking about them becoming the new, Alabama of college football.
And one thing that we haven't really mentioned in this extended preview about Georgia is we've talked about their inconsistency this year, but when they play the top teams on their schedule, the Tennessees, the LSUs, they have just absolutely dominated. They've come out ready to play. They certainly rise to the level of their competition. That's definitely something to watch for too.
Yeah, a couple of final scores for you from this year, just for Georgia when they played those big teams. They beat Oregon 49-3.
Oregon too.
They beat, I don't know if you want to call South Carolina big. They had a good year, but they beat them 48-7. They beat Auburn 42-10. That's a rivalry game for them. They beat Florida, another rival, 42-20. Tennessee, lots of hype this year, 27-13. And then, if you want to call Georgia Tech, they're not very good, but that is kind of a rivalry. But LSU at the end of the year, 50-30. They just open up wide margins in these games. They have some flaws on offense. They have some issues on offense. They open up big margins and they show up to play in this one. Could this be the fact their inconsistency this year? Could you be saying that this is just a hangover from the fact that they won the Natty? Most of those guys came back and they're just looking forward to the playoff. Yeah, maybe. But the problem is, here's the playoff, the thing they've been looking forward to all year. So I think it's a dangerous point for Ohio State. Not to say they can't win this game, but I just don't see it happening.
Gracious him! How about